Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our Master of Ceremonies, Michael Zorbas.
And for those of you who are not currently in the line for coffee, now's the chance for you to scuttle to a seat. I think they're unreserved, so you're welcome to take any opportunity that arises. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Green Cities 2018. As the booming voice from the microphone said previously, I'm Mike Zorbas. I'm your MC for the next 2 days of wall-to-wall excellence. And I'm currently also the Locum Property Council of Australia Executive Director, while Sally Capp is a candidate to be Melbourne's new Lord Mayor, and I warmly acknowledge her presence here today in a studiously neutral way. Today marks the 12th Green Cities Conference, Australia's leading sustainability conference for the built environment. Happy birthday, happy 12th birthday, Green Cities. Please join with me in giving our hosts Romilly and Ken and their teams a big round of happy birthday applause for their vision in making all of this happen. Now, Elder Colin Hunter of the Wurundjeri people, who was to join us for the Welcome to Country today, is sadly unwell. So let me remark that in speaking I acknowledge on behalf of us all the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. And more than that, I acknowledge that everyone in this room, each of us, has an opportunity to do more in celebrating the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history of this continent, in supporting Aboriginal businesses and in closing the many gaps which persist across the spectrum of human existence, from equality of opportunity to tougher matters that we all have to face, like mortality and youth suicide. Additionally, this fine morning we have a cavalcade of special welcomes. Not all yet here, I imagine, but worth acknowledging. The Acting Lord Mayor, Aaron Wood, City of Melbourne, definitely here. Welcome, Aaron, thank you. The Honourable Josh Frydenberg MP, Federal Minister for the Environment and Energy. The Honourable Angus Taylor MP, Federal Minister for Law Enforcement and Cyber Security. Which reminds me, we've got some free Wi-Fi here, but I'm sure there are other matters that'll remind me of in due course. The Honourable Anthony Albanese MP, Shadow Federal Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Cities and Regional Development. The Honourable Mark Butler, Federal Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy and ALP President. The Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change. Kylie Ramper, Chief Executive Officer, Property Australia at Lend-Lease, our generous Green Cities partner. Thank you again, Kylie and the team. Rod Ferring, our wonderful Chair of the Green Building Council of Australia Board, and Fraser's Property CEO Australia. And to all those speakers and delegates who've come from galaxies far, far away to be with us today, thank you so much for making the time. We do appreciate it. In 2017, the Green Cities conversation centred around fast forwarding to the future to see what a sustainable built environment will look like. And I must say, having binge-watched over the weekend David Attenborough's marvellous Blue Planet 2, I must admit I think we've got a long way to go to getting the supply chains for our cities up to scratch environmentally. And this year we're focusing on how we get there, and we believe the answer lies in energising communities. So we've got a bold vision for the statement of the built environment, and those of you who were lucky enough to join us at the breakfast that Turi just moderated with some of our leaders will understand just what a roadmap that involves. So over the next 2 days we'll unite the great minds on stage, and hopefully you as our audience will really get involved in this, to ask a number of questions and to answer them. How will health and well-being impact the way we build our cities? What can we learn about communities through reconciliation? How will we win the race to renewables, and how can we rethink resilience and spark sustainable solutions? And to start that very energising process, it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who needs absolutely no introduction to the people of Melbourne, the Acting Lord Mayor, Aaron Wood, who is going to provide the host city welcome for this wonderful city, the world's most livable. I think it's 7 years in a row, is that right, Aaron? You'll correct me in due course. Please make him very warmly welcome to the stage, Acting Lord Mayor Aaron Wood.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is 7 years in a row. I'll never get tired of actually saying that. I'd like to acknowledge the land of the Kulin Nation, the land on which we meet this morning, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and thank them for all the work that they do in our community and right throughout Australia, particularly in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people, who not only commit to teaching us about caring for country, but also work so well with the next generation coming through. It's great to be here. I won't acknowledge all of those people that our MC has acknowledged again, but to acknowledge our ministers, our shadow ministers, the Green Building Council, the Property Council, all of the great developers in the room that make Melbourne such an engine room of Australia. Just the central city alone, a $100 billion economy that we're actually driving here, and a lot of that has to do with how we're building our city to be a more sustainable one into the future. We're really proud to host your 12th annual conference. It's wonderful to see it back here again. It is such an important part of what a sustainable future is going to be. If we get the city conversation right, if we get our built environment right, then essentially we will get a more sustainable future right. So many passionate people in the room. I want to acknowledge Romilly. I'm just going to call her out because the irrepressible Romilly, who absolutely champions this cause and has done for quite some time. And I know she's not the only one, but it's people like her which actually tell us that there's challenges and there's opportunities. And when you talk about a more sustainable future, we can talk about all the threats. We can sit there and talk about all of the kind of disasters coming our way. And what that does is often disempowers people. It's important to understand the facts, it's important to understand the science, but it's also really, really important to say, what can we do? And then what can we realise as a result of doing these things? I'm pleased that City of Melbourne continues to be at the forefront of this challenge. Stationary energy, the built environment, making the city a walking city, all of these sorts of things that are not only about environmental sustainability, they're actually about cities that are great for people. We've made sure that we're well represented globally. We've participated in networks like Bloomberg's C40 network. We're part of the 100 Resilient Cities Rockefeller Foundation network because we know that obviously national governments have a huge role to play, especially with signing up to the Paris climate targets. But increasingly cities are where the greatest opportunity lies to do some of the heavy lifting as we try and meet those targets. And not only do that heavy lifting and meet those targets, but actually drive huge economic return, well-being outcomes, meet the urban heat island effect head on to actually make our cities more livable into the future. Melbourne 2018 is a real city transformed. If we look back sort of in the mid-80s, we had a population of around about 30,000 people. That population has absolutely exploded in no small means through the efforts of Professor Rob Adams and Postcode 3000. So we actually have a thriving inner city, one of the fastest growing municipalities in Australia, and as I spoke before, that presents huge challenges, how we grow smartly, how we ensure that our infrastructure keeps pace with demand, but it also presents huge opportunities to realise a much more sustainable future. I want to sort of go down to a bit of the finer grain of stuff. We've had lots of accolades around our landscape planning for things like Return to Royal Park, which has won awards all around the world. The superb library at the dock, a 6-star rated civic building of cross-laminated timber that people just absolutely love and has become a real civic hub of Docklands. We've won awards for the Swanston Street lighting projects. We're changing over our LEDs, we're making our lighting smart, we're reducing emissions, and in the process saving about $1 million in annual costs just in our lighting alone. Just a couple of weeks ago we learned that our Queen Victoria Market Renewal Project achieved 6-star Green Star rating for communities, the first local government in Australia to be awarded that level of Green Star rating for a project certainly of that magnitude. We're one of the first cities in Australia to devise a zero net emissions strategy to look at all of those areas of emission, how we could meet them, how we could drive them down, and also drive prosperity within the city. We see not as a choice between economy and the environment, they are really one and the same. We launched the 1200 Buildings Initiative, and the program encourages private landowners to retrofit their buildings with access to low-cost finance. Last year when we surveyed our landowners, we found that 932 buildings had been retrofitted since 2012. The important part of that is 8,000 new jobs created as a result and an economic uplift of $2 billion. Again, economy and environment working hand in hand. One that I'm really proud of is that in a week's time we'll turn the sod on a new Ararat wind farm. That was driven by a group purchasing model which I initiated, and we brought in 13 other organisations, National Australia Bank, Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Bureau, Fed Square, other local governments, University of Melbourne, RMIT. We pooled all of our energy together, about 110 gigawatt hours of purchasing power. We went out to market and we've proven a new way of group purchasing here in Australia, and we'll switch the power on for about enough power for 28,000 homes as a result of that purchasing power. That's not waiting for policy to line up, that's not waiting for absolute consensus, that's getting on and doing the job. We've got a target of 25% renewables by 2018, so we want to play our part in the Victorian renewable energy target because we think it's about good business. As I mentioned before, urban heat is a serious issue for cities around the world. The Black Saturday bushfires, we know that over 170 lives were lost in those bushfires, an absolute tragedy. What's lesser known, but pleasingly the story is being told more and more, is that in the lead-up heat wave to those Black Saturday bushfires, we had about a week and a half of serious hot weather. Over 370 lives were lost due to heat-related illness and stress. So heat is not just about how the city feels, it's not just about livability, it's absolutely a premier health issue that we need to meet. So with that challenge, we had the urban forest strategy. Since 2012, we've created an additional 10,000 square metres of green space. We're planting 3,000 trees every year to cool the city by 4 degrees. And we've launched our Green Laneways program as well. We know that we're going to have to green the city as it densifies, and we've got to think laterally about that. Green roofs, green facades, green laneways, all of these present huge opportunities for us. I just want to finish before I go by saying that I don't want to miss this opportunity. I've got about 60 days left as Acting Lord Mayor of this great city, and I'm going to use every opportunity I can to put forward what I think is really smart policy, and we're at a bit of a turning point here. It's not new policy by any means. But GE has been pricing carbon into their operations since about 2007. Many organisations in this room already price carbon into their operations. It is absolutely high time that we had a working carbon price in this country, because it's about a just transition. It's about a smooth transition to what we know is a changing economy. So we must have a working carbon price in Australia. Thanks so much and enjoy your conference.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to the Acting Lord Mayor for a characteristically warm and insightful welcome, and indeed a very impressive and commendable sustainability partnership to energise our communities across a whole range of initiatives, actually. I know I speak for Melburnians when I say we appreciate the work that Aaron is doing. I would now like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors and partners, those generous beings who are the Southern Cross to our green city's night sky. In particular, and do save your applause, our principal sponsor of these 6 years past, Lend-Lease, our major sponsors, Fraser's Property Australia, Landcom, Liberty One Steel, Stockland Wood Solutions, our associate sponsors, Arab BlueScope Steel, ProBuild, our supporting sponsors, Kingspan, the CRC for Low Carbon Living and Telstra, our display sponsors, GeoAir, production partner, South Pole, our media partners, Green Magazine, Retrofit Australia, sector partners, Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, Energy Efficiency Council, Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia. And we'd also like to extend a warm welcome to our future leaders and young Indigenous professionals whose attendance has been supported by Landcom. Good on you, Ken and the team. So please make them all very, very welcome and thank them for their generous support of the conference. The conference app is run through Attendify, as you can see on the screen, free to download. And in the interest of sustainability, it's replaced our printed out program for this year. That'll be the key point of reference for absolutely everything, upcoming sessions, speaker info, and it also offers you the chance to engage and network. So please download that now over the free Wi-Fi Connect to Green Cities 2018, which you'll find in your drop-down list there, and use the password Melbourne, case-sensitive capital M Melbourne, and you can check the screens in the conference app for further details. Throughout the conference, and this is where your engagement is crucially important, we'll be taking questions via SMS as well as roving microphones. So please keep your phones handy, although we'll come to how loud they should be in a moment. SMS GC18 and your question to 0427541357 during each session, and we also obviously use the Twitter hashtag #GreenCities18, where you can obviously engage with our speakers and your peers. No, still here, not assassinated yet. Yeah, although I am going to drag this out. There's quite a lot of thanking to do, so, you know, save the bullets. As well as the Green Cities app, and don't forget LinkedIn. Do not forget LinkedIn, the poor cousin of Twitter. And now, the hills are alive with the sound of housekeeping. Toilets are located in the foyer around to the left when exiting the room, and I had an experience with the toilets this morning. Antoinette, who's one of the conference organisers, locked them in order to create a sense of urgency in me to keep us on time. She didn't lock them for long enough, obviously, because we're a little behind as we speak. Please note, in the case of emergency, you'll be directed to the main assembly point outside the hotel via the green exit signs. You must wear your name badge. Don't do what I'm doing and don't wear it. It tells you everything about where you need to go, what sessions you're enrolled for, refreshment breaks, social functions, and what you're allowed into. And lastly, please, and I don't want to do this too quickly, imagine for a moment in your mind's eye Michael Bolton. Good. And now ensure that your mobile phone is switched to mute, make no noise, inaudible for the rest of the 2 days, if you would. And to thank you, to thank our speakers for their participation, I should also note that a donation has been made to the very worthy cause of Oxfam on their behalf. Now we have a chance to give a very warm welcome, without further ado, to our paramount sponsor, Kylie Ramper, the Chief Executive Officer, Property Australia Lend-Lease, who will say a few words after this short video. Please make her very welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's once again my absolute pleasure and privilege to represent Lend-Lease as the principal sponsor for Green Cities 2018. And like other speakers, I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and offer my support and respect for their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. As Lend-Lease's Chief Executive Officer of Australian property business, I've been a visitor and participant at Green Cities for the past several years. For me, Green Cities is the key forum where practitioners, policymakers, opinion setters, and others gather to discuss and debate the built environment. What it is, how it's changing, where it's heading, all through the lens of sustainability. We've come a long way since this conversation entered the mainstream in the early part of this century. Then we were talking about environmental outcomes at the building level. Now we're talking entire precincts, and we're applying a social impact lens to real estate, which includes the rapid emergence of its effect on human health and wellness. Soon, we will be in a position to measure the economic benefit of the subsequent increased productivity we are confident is being achieved. In fact, Lendlease's international towers at Barangaroo, as well as our own global headquarters, has just been awarded Platinum WELL certification as one of the world's healthiest places to work. I believe that's a remarkable achievement and one we share with our tenants, our own people, and our investors. But what's next? What are the challenges the people in this room need to overcome to truly meet the needs of our cities and their citizens into the future? Who are the people we need to engage with who are not in this room, but who will be the ones to drive the next level of innovation and sustainability? How do we shake up the model? None of us have a crystal ball, and it will be for generations to judge our efforts. So I'd encourage everyone to relish and make the most of the opportunity this conference offers to get out of your day-to-day, seek out alternative points of view, and prepare yours to be challenged. I'm sure by the end of the conference, we will have a good sense of where the policy debate is at, where the big ideas are coming from, and a sense of what the short to medium term may in fact look like. I'm also sure we'll hear lots about and reflect and discuss the many facets that make up sustainability and the built environment: ethical investing, energy, technology, big data, even our mental health. You will hear about all of these and much more. As the principal sponsor, I'd like to personally extend a warm welcome to you all as well and look forward to hearing from you. At its broadest, the challenge I would set you is one that most people in this room would be familiar. As industry leaders, how do we inspire and shape the next innovations and outcomes for the people that work, shop, play, learn and live in the built environment, to deliver the positive outcomes today as well as for future generations? I admit I don't have all the answers. I would say no individual person or organisation does have the entire answer. But I know that we all have a vital contribution to make. And what I know from my time leading Lendlease's property business is that the best answers happen when we work in partnership, whether with government or private interests, to enable the very best places to be created. And that's when the magic happens. That means that this year's conference theme suggests we need to energise communities. Energising communities is the theme with a suitable ambiguity, one that isn't overly prescriptive and one that will encourage debate to flow in hopefully unexpected ways. And it's one that has two words front and centre for many delegates: energy and community. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
Wonderfully done. Folks, please join with me in thanking Kylie again. Humble, generous to a fault with her prodigious smarts, and a long-term investor in this conference and our industry. Please join with me in saying a great thanks. Our keynote session today is proudly sponsored by our major sponsor, Frasers Property Australia. And before we commence, we have a short video featuring Joanna Russell, General Manager of Retail Development at Frasers Property Australia, discussing what an energised community looks like.
At Frasers Property, we believe that experience matters, and we've really challenged ourselves through our development pipeline for retail assets. We've gone beyond the transaction to energise communities. And for us, that means creating places where people can come and enjoy and spend time. We're responding to the community requirements. But for example, at Eastern Creek, we're responding to the Western Sydney parklands that we're developing by incorporating bike tracks and a real recreational focus. And at Burwood Brickworks, we have an urban farm on the roof with an educational focus. Experience matters.
Please thank Joanna and Frasers for their sponsorship of this session. Now, as I've alluded to, Ron and Ken have us all tendons at full mast on the rack of timeliness this morning, so we're going to have some serious heavy hitters to begin with, who are going to love us, provoke us and leave us in quick succession. And on that note, it is now with tremendous pleasure that I introduce our speaker for the first session, plugging into a low-carbon future, a great Australian whose name is synonymous with climate change analysis. Ross Garnaut is now leading the renewable energy revolution in Australia. What state is the current energy market in? What are the key trends that will shape our future? And where do the opportunities for the property industry lie? For the answers to these and more, please join me in welcoming to the stage Professor Ross Garnaut, AC, President CIMIC Zen Energy.
Ministers, Shadow Ministers, Acting Lord Mayor, I'd like to begin by endorsing the final remarks of the Acting Lord Mayor. A functional carbon price would make everything easier. I would not have dared to mention it myself, but I will endorse the Acting Lord Mayor's bold espousal of good policy. I'm going to talk about the energy transition globally and in Australia briefly, because it has to be brief, and then say a little bit about the role of cities and communities in that. I speak as someone who's been following these issues for a long time and been deeply involved in the public policy discussion for a long time, but also now as President of CIMIC Zen Energy. For a number of years I chaired the board of a renewable energy company that was doing innovative things on a modest scale. Last October, the GFG group, Sanjeev Gupta's group, purchased a 50.1% interest in the company, and now we're doing all of that much faster and bigger. And as Sanjeev's group, which includes Liberty One Steel, is one of the sponsors of the conference. He would like to have been here today, and I'm very glad to say something about his work in the course of my remarks. There is a global revolution in energy going on. It's driven by two main things. One is something we don't often think about because it's there in the background, but that is the extension of modern economic development to the developing world. For quite a while, about 10% of the people on Earth have enjoyed the high standards of living that we enjoy in Melbourne. Most of the rest of the world, the vast majority of humanity, had much lower living standards. Poverty was endemic. Over the last generation, we've seen most of the developing world join modern economic development with rapidly rising incomes, and that includes rapidly rising demand for energy. We saw it most dramatically on the largest scale in China, but something similar is happening, albeit at a lesser pace, in the other big Asian economies, led by India and Indonesia. China, in the first dozen years of this century, accounted for almost the whole of the growth in world coal consumption, and by the end of the time it accounted for about half of world coal consumption. It accounted for the overwhelming majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. That had two big consequences. One, it made fossil energy scarce and expensive. It gave Australia its resources boom. And then when China realised it had to do something about the pattern of growth that was driving these effects, gave us the dog days in the aftermath of the resources boom. It increased the price of oil and natural gas to more than 5 times what it had been prior to this period of rapid growth. It brought forward an awareness of the finite nature of fossil energy reserves. In their nature, fossil energies, coal, natural gas, oil, are finite. The great Australian economist Colin Clark, in his book Conditions of Economic Progress, said in 1942, modern economic development is built on fossil energy. he said it is finite. We know how much must be in the ground because we know how much carbon was once in the atmosphere, which through a billion years of action of algae and plants was sequestered in the Earth's surface. He said one day that will bring growth in the current style to an end. But don't worry, he said, there will be sustainable ways of keeping economic development growing. We'll find sustainable forms of energy. He said then, 42, the most efficient technology we know is the Australian eucalypt, which converts carbon in the atmosphere and sunlight into energy at lower cost than any other way we know. But he said there's been a recent bit of scientific research in Cambridge that tells us that one day the silicon conductors may be an even more efficient means of converting sunlight into usable energy. Well, the rest is history. We would have had to have made the transition from fossil energy to other forms of energy at some time. Strong growth in energy demand was making fossil energy scarce and expensive, but we've had to move faster than we otherwise would have because of another consequence of energy use, and that is climate change. It's only a few decades since the scientific evidence has been very clear about the relationship between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and climate. Continued scientific research has told us more clearly as time has gone on about the risks to our civilization, our economies, of unmitigated climate change. We now know in a fair bit of detail the awful consequences of not changing the energy mix, consequences that will come upon us more rapidly than they otherwise would have done because of the extension of modern economic development into the developing world. So these two big forces, extension of global economic development into the developing countries and awareness of the reality of climate change are driving a global energy revolution. Climate change itself is changing energy use and its consequences. It's increased demand for energy for cooling in hot places like southern Australia in summer. It's also made energy demand more peaky. We need much more of it on hot days, and that's rather difficult to supply and expensive to supply. It's also made fossil energy and the transmission of fossil energy less reliable because the old thermal generators don't work as well on very hot days, and transmission lines are subject to fault and risk in extreme temperature conditions. The well-known blackout in South Australia in September 2016 was the result of unprecedented climatic events, at least unprecedented in the historical record, and we've had more frequent disruption of normal transmission of electricity through extreme weather events, bushfires, cyclones up the east coast of Australia over recent years. Climate change has affected demand for energy and also supply of energy. Climate change and the higher price of fossil energy have together driven a great period of innovation in energy, and not only invention of new things, but a more thorough search of old technologies for new ways of doing things. Some of the innovation that's occurring is simply a dusting off of old technologies. At the beginning of of the modern industrial age, or more than 100 years ago. Thomas Edison was a strong supporter of the electric car, saying it was much more efficient than the internal combustion engine. For a while, he worked in a joint venture with Henry Ford to make this a reality. An awful set of political and other circumstances led history down a different path, but we're dusting off all of that, and we're going to find that the electric car provides more energy efficient, lower cost transport, and opens up a whole new range of ways of doing things in cities as a result. We're heading towards a future in which the whole world is using energy that's generated with zero emissions. And Australia is fortunate in that world because we have a far richer endowment per person of renewable energy resources than any other country. So that as the whole world moves towards low carbon energy, if we do things right, and doing things right means good policy and an innovative business sector, but if we do things right, we will be the low-cost energy country in the developed world. Will be the natural home of new and old energy-using industries that are subject to international competition. In this new world, we will find energy supplied in many different ways. I expect that in southern Australia, most electrons, the great bulk of electricity will come from very low cost solar and wind energy, but we'll need big investments in managing the intermittency of those forms of energy. The balancing of intermittency will come in many different ways. It will come in long-distance transmission, so that you're balancing different climatic conditions across the country. It will come through demand management, people using less energy when it's scarce and more expensive, and using a whole range of new technologies to help us to do that. We'll see greater use of batteries, we'll see use of hydroelectricity. The capacity we have will have much more value because it will be used for peaking purposes rather than just as baseload power. And pumped hydro storage will become much more important. We'll find new forms of energy generation that in their nature allow us to store energy and use it at different times. Hydrogen will become an important source of energy. I've mentioned the electric car. It's going to provide an exciting source of transmission in many ways in our cities. It's going to be very closely related to the driverless car. It's more easily adjusted to those new technologies than the old vehicles. Just imagine what opportunities that provides in the cities. You'll no longer have Sydney Road clogged up with lines of cars parked on each side of the road. We'll face the choice of not using scarce land in our cities for parking on the road. People will be taken to their destinations, and we'll use all of that valuable space for enjoyment of different forms of living, or economically. We will have a wide range of additional choices. The GFG group, Sanjeev Gupta's group, sees itself as playing a central role in this transition in Australia. Sanjeev Gupta, the owner and chairman of the group, pioneered the approach he's adopting here in Britain when he bought derelict British steel and revived it. And he now has done a very similar thing with the British aluminium industry. He's reduced energy costs and made those industries more competitive by using lower cost renewable energy. And a special focus has been on green steel, on focusing on recycling of steel, and his view is that a stable, developed country like Britain can produce pretty well all the steel it needs on a continuing basis from recycled steel using renewable energy in the recycling. Australia, still with a lot of population growth, a lot of building growth, will need both recycled steel and blast furnace steel, but over time we will find new technologies to reduce steel, reduce iron ore to iron metal without carbon emissions. The Gupta Group bought the One Steel Group when it was in administration, having failed under its previous management. That involves the steelworks in Whyalla, the steelworks in Western Melbourne at Laverton, in Western Sydney at Rooty Hill, and in Newcastle. And our group, Cymex N Energy, is working with Sanjeev on transformation of energy supply to these. But this isn't a one-off for the steel industry. A similar transformation can be made available to all energy-using industries in Australia. And Sanjeev's put his fortune where his mouth is. He's made a huge investment in Australia because he believes that Australia, in the low-carbon world economy, should be the place where energy is cheapest and energy-using industries most competitive. That is our future. Communities have a special role to play in this transformation. Many of the most valuable innovations in energy efficiency and using the technologies are best applied in a decentralized and local level. And one thing that's very clear is that there is huge community support for the energy transition. When people are given the chance to adopt the new technologies, they adopt them enthusiastically. When they're given the chance to, a fair chance to vote for change of this kind, they vote for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Professor Garneau, and of course 3 cheers for the espousal of good public policy. That was a tremendous presentation, and we're very appreciative of your time here this morning, and thank you for staying around. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you over morning tea. And thank you again to our major sponsor, Fraser's Property Australia. Please join with me in thanking them again. Thank you. Folks, just a housekeeping footnote. The app Attendify requires a password, Energize18, one word, capital E, just to make sure you've got full access to that. Very important for the purposes of the program, as I've outlined before. It is now with great pleasure that I veer away from housekeeping and introduce our keynote speaker for the next session of Cerebral Speed Dating, the Big Policy Picture. Mark Butler is known to a great many of you. He's been the Labor member for Port Adelaide in the Federal Parliament since 2007 and is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Mark served as Minister for Ageing and Australia's first Minister for Mental Health, very interestingly in the Gillard government. He has also held ministries for housing, homelessness, social inclusion, climate change, water and the environment. So some very, very important and topical matters. And in 2013, Mark was awarded the Alzheimer's Disease International Award for extraordinary contribution to tackling dementia. He was also elected, as many of you would know, National President of the Australian Labor Party in 2015 and is the author of Advanced Australia, The Politics of Ageing, published in 2015, and Climate Wars, published in 2017. Please give him a very warm welcome, our second keynote for the morning, Shadow Minister Mark Butler.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much to the Green Building Council and to the Property Council for the invitation to be here. I'm particularly pleased that I've been asked to talk about the big picture. A politician loves nothing more than being asked to steer away from details and just focus on the very broad brushstrokes in the broadest possible manner you can. So I'm keen to do that, but I'm also very pleased to be able to follow Ross Garnaut, who genuinely is one of Australia's outstanding public intellectuals, particularly in this area, but not only in this area of policy, and has been for many decades. Not just a public intellectual in the more abstract thinking sense, but also in the doing sense. And I'm reminded that 10 years ago, I think, Ross, as you'll remember, you were busy beavering away at the Climate Change Review for a number of state governments and for the new Rudd Labor government. And I saw that next week, it's 10 years exactly, that you released your emissions trading scheme discussion paper, and how there was such promise back then. Both parties had taken an ETS as their policy to the 2007 federal election. Indeed, later that year, both Barack Obama and John McCain, remember them, took a cap and trade scheme to the 2008 presidential election. There was great hope that we would be able to build on that apparent political consensus and put in place an enduring, stable reform, a functional carbon price, as I understand the acting Lord Mayor described it, and move forward and take advantage of those opportunities that Ross just talked about. But it was only a short time after, in the following year, that that emerging consensus really imploded here in Australia and ushered in what I described in my book, The Climate Wars, available at all good bookstores, mainly in the remaindered section. All proceeds going to Alzheimer's Australia, what I described as the climate wars. And those climate wars and the dismantling of that emerging consensus has had entirely predictable consequences. We saw the entire dismantling of a carbon price framework or a climate change policy framework, still the only country to entirely dismantle a framework in climate change policy. We saw the reversal of what we thought were deeply embedded reforms, particularly at state level around, for example, broad-scale land clearing. And we saw very significant investor uncertainty ushered in, particularly into the energy sector, but also the industrial sector among big energy users and in transport sector, as investors saw Canberra, frankly, as paralysed in their ability to develop enduring policy reforms that would last the life of some of these very long-lived assets. And while Australia is perhaps not entirely unique in this sense of having real policy paralysis or ideological division in the area of climate change, we are very, very unusual. And I often draw attention to the contrast with the United Kingdom, a country which has very similar political systems, similar ideological divisions, and a very similar media market that I think has been important in the development of the climate wars here in Australia. And at the same time, or the same point in time, when Australia's emerging consensus around climate change policy was imploding back in 2008, 2009, the United Kingdom's emerging consensus was being embedded into a bipartisan Climate Change Act, supported by David Cameron as the new look Conservative leader, and also by the Labor Party. And it's so important that that legislation has endured. It's endured for the decade since, and it's endured through some incredibly difficult, divisive political moments in the UK's history. Most notably, I think, after Brexit. The fifth carbon budget under that legislation was endorsed unanimously by the UK Parliament only a matter of weeks after the divisive Brexit vote that led to pretty much every UK political leader losing their job. And it's an ambitious budget. It would see carbon levels in the United Kingdom cut from 2005 levels by 61% by 2030, by 61%. Now, the data released by the government just before Christmas, literally just before Christmas last year, by our government, indicate that under current policy settings, Australia's carbon levels will have reduced by 5%. Not 61%, but by 5% over that same time period, 2005 to 2030. And that's really only because an accounting change to the way in which land sector emissions are treated wiped literally millions of tonnes off the books with a stroke of the pen. This policy paralysis is incredibly divisive and debilitating for the Australian economy and for our responsibility to future generations. It's important, I think, to point out that while the UK is able to embark on this globally ambitious, really ambitious decarbonisation agenda, they're doing so while maintaining their industrial base. As Ross pointed out, decarbonisation and a strong industrial base are not inconsistent. While the UK is going on the path they're going on, they still make 3 times as much steel as we do here in Australia. They still have 800,000 workers employed in the automotive industry at a point in time when Australia has shut down its car-making capacity. So they're able to do that while maintaining a very strong industrial base. The policy paralysis you see in Canberra simply can't go on. We see through our data that carbon pollution is rising. We're failing our responsibility to future generations and the rest of the international community. And we're starting to see, perhaps unlike 10 years ago, we're starting to see the private sector simply move on in spite of what the government is doing or isn't doing. You just have to look at the debate last year over whether Australia should embark on a round of building new coal-fired power stations. The only business figure who stuck their hand up at Malcolm Turnbull's invitation to indicate some interest in building new coal-fired power stations in Australia was Clive Palmer, whose last great idea was building Titanic 2. Everyone else indicated that their plans for building energy into the future was squarely based on renewable energy and the sort of vision that Ross just talked about. And that's not just because renewable energy is cleaner and increasingly cheaper, it's also because investors increasingly are alive to climate-related financial risk, the sort of risk that Mark Carney from England and the task force that he and the Financial Stability Board set up through TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, talked about last year. It's a risk that regulators, including here in Australia, are increasingly alive to as well, particularly led by the work of APRA. Now, your sector is a shining example of one that is moving ahead in spite of policy paralysis in Canberra rather than because of it. But the movement you see in the built environment is still not ubiquitous. While parts of your sector are at world's best practice, many other parts are not. We know, for example, that a new office building constructed today in Australia under our National Construction Code will be about 20% less energy efficient than a similar building built under the construction codes in the United States and China. And while we welcome the improvements to the code in the commercial sector that will be ushered in 2019, we share the sector's frustration at the slow pace at which similar improvements are being made in the residential code, and also the frustration at the lack of a medium and long-term trajectory that sets a pathway for decarbonising this sector along with the rest of the economy. Obviously, time doesn't permit me, unfortunately, to talk about the broader challenges in the energy sector, particularly the development of a policy framework for investment in the sector beyond 2020. The National Energy Guarantee, we hope, is still the basis for a possible bipartisan solution this year, but we are concerned that on Bloomberg's analysis of the modelling released thus far, the NEG, or the National Energy Guarantee, would see a 95% cut in investment in large-scale renewables through the course of the 2020s when matched against current investment levels. That can't be good for the future of our country. Labor is committed to that bipartisan framework. We're also committed to trying to give a heart starter to energy efficiency in this country, which the latest NEP, or the National Energy Productivity Plan report, showed is slowing even against our historically slow rates altogether. The latest NEP indicated that the last full-year results saw energy efficiency in Australia improve by only 0.4% against a 15-year average of 1.7%. And our Australian Investment Guarantee that we announced yesterday, that would see immediate depreciation of 20% of investments, including investments designed to improve energy efficiency, is part of our attempt to give a heart starter to the cause of saving energy, not just taking a supply-side solution. So, friends, with those brief thoughts, can I really thank the Green Buildings Council and also the Property Council for a number of things, for continuing to develop innovative thinking in this area, in decarbonisation more broadly, in pushing governments and oppositions at state and federal level to be more ambitious in this area, and in showcasing the great work that really is happening in the built environment. Thank you very much for the invitation to be at conference this morning, and I wish you all the very best for the next couple of days. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shadow Minister, and thank you for taking the time to share with us your obvious delight in the big picture, your roadmap for the future, and equally your commitment to the joyous cut and thrust of our great national contest of ideas. That was very evident. Folks, please join with me in thanking the Shadow Federal Minister once more. And our generous sponsors. Building on the theme of energising communities this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce our next session, A Radical Rethink on Energy. Please welcome to the stage our terrific moderator, Anna Scarbeck, Chief Executive Officer, Climate Works Australia.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the big picture policy session, and we certainly do have some big hitters to help discuss the big picture with you this morning. I want us to get straight into it, so I'm going to introduce our panellists and invite their remarks and then an engaged conversation between all of us. We're privileged to have with us on the stage, joining with me, firstly please, John Pickhaver, Co-Head of Infrastructure, Utilities and Renewables for Macquarie Capital. Mark Steinert, Managing Director and CEO of Stockland. The Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio MP, Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change in the State Government of Victoria. Welcome, Lily. And the Honourable Josh Frydenberg MP, Minister for the Environment and Energy in the Federal Parliament of Australia. What a panel, folks. I know you are all bursting with excitement to hear what sort of a dialogue this group can produce. To begin, we will hear first from both the ministers on the topic of energising communities, in particular with a focus on energy efficiency, smart energy, and the renewables challenge. And so first, I'd like to invite our Federal Minister for Environment and Energy, Josh Frydenberg.
Well, thanks, Anna, and can I acknowledge my fellow panellists, and particularly Lily D'Ambrosio, my state counterpart, and to Mark Butler, the Shadow Energy Minister from Canberra. And Mark and I, while we may sometimes disagree on the path to get to a lower emissions, more affordable and reliable energy system, we certainly agree on that outcome, and we've been able to have mature and constructive and frank dialogue, so I thank him for that. Can I thank the organisers for today and the opportunity here, and can I particularly mention ASBEC and the Property Council, the Green Building Council, and it's very pleasing to see local government, state government and federal government coming to talk about this important issue. Now, obviously, we have been preoccupied at the federal level with the supply side as of late, particularly around how do we deal with a very much changing or rapidly changing energy market. And of course, it's understandable why we've been talking about the supply side. We've had a number of coal-fired power stations close. We've had more renewables and intermittent renewables coming into the system. We've had to solve for, and we still are trying to solve for, the issue of storage. But overwhelmingly, we have been focusing on the supply side. That being said, the demand side is absolutely critical, and that's why today's discussion about energy efficiency is really important. It's important for those three objectives of reliability, affordability, and lower emissions. In terms of lower emissions, as we know, around half of Australia's emissions come from the built environment. So if you are going to tackle the emission challenge, the carbon footprint, you need to tackle the built environment. It's very important to affordability because about half the household bill relates to relates to hot water and it relates to heating of the home. So if you can get greater efficiencies, particularly around that, but also household appliances, you can deal with the affordability. And it's also critical around the reliability piece. It's estimated that if a household would reduce their peak demand by 1 kilowatt of power, then that would save $1,000 of energy infrastructure investment that otherwise would have been needed. And we know that around $11 billion worth of infrastructure investment, which is under the regulated asset base, is used only around 1% of the time. It's around 4 to 5 days a year. So if we are able to get more energy efficiency, then we will be able to reduce the need for both generation and network expenditure. And in fact, as Fatty Barol said to me the other day, the best type of power station is the one you don't have to build. And to do that through tackling energy efficiency is really important. So what have we been doing? Well, firstly, we've set ourselves the goal of a National Energy Productivity Plan, which is designed to boost energy efficiency and productivity by 40% by 2030. The other thing that we've been doing is focusing on standards for appliances. So we put in place 22 different appliance standards. Now, that's saved the average household around $220 a year. What we are doing now is going through the process of new standards for 6 appliances: air conditioning, lighting, pool pumps, fridges and freezers, fans, and that is going to be very important in terms of getting the save going forward. And we know there are huge energy efficiency saves by moving to these new standards of equipment. For example, if you were to move from a 2-star to an 8-star pool pump, you'd save up to $800 a year. Households can save thousands of dollars by moving from the halogen to the LED lighting. The other area of focus for us has been around commercial building disclosure. And as you would well know, we reduced the disclosure threshold to 1,000 square metres. Now, this has produced about a $50 million saving, and it's estimated some 3.5 million tonnes of emissions reduction. So that's been very significant, and we're now again looking back at our commercial building disclosure arrangements. The other thing that we've done is we've expanded the carbon offset standards to include the built environment. So now there are 57 certifications across 34 different organisations, and again that's been very successful. 10 million tonnes of CO2 has been reduced through that voluntary program. That's equivalent of taking 3 million cars off the road for a year. The other thing we're doing is through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is a loan program, as well as ARENA, which is a grant program. But through the loan program of the CFC, we've been investing in energy efficiency. $200 million was put into a portfolio of Queensland shopping centres as an energy efficiency program. We've invested in a 6-star building in Geelong. We've also investing in energy efficiency outside the built environment. For example, recently with the CSIRO, $100 million was allocated for the agricultural sector. Not to mention our sustainable cities and the like. Obviously, small-scale solar has also been a big focus, and there's, under the renewable energy target, there's been significant subsidies that has been flowing through in record amounts, dare I say it, over a gigawatt, over 1,000 megawatts of small-scale solar was installed over the last year, surpassing the previous record of 2012. Now, where are we going from here? And this is what you're all interested in. There are a number of reviews underway, and that's where our focus is. So the GEMS Act is being reviewed, 5-year statutory review that has recently been announced, and Anna Collier, who's got some experience in the energy space, is conducting that for us. We've announced in our climate energy policy, which was released at the end of last year that we'll be reviewing the commercial building disclosure program, and the goal for that is to have that up and running by mid-year. Obviously, the construction code for commercial buildings has been the talk of state and federal governments and a lot of people in the sector. We're working towards a 2019 review of that process, and there's a discussion paper out for that. And bearing in mind that half the buildings that will be around in 2050 will be approved after the 2019 construction code changes. So those changes that we make will actually determine the standards for the majority of the buildings that will be around by 2050. Now, when it comes to the residential code, that is something that has been put to 2022. Obviously, probably people in this room would like that accelerated. This has been a discussion between state and federal governments, and it will be coming to COAG later this year. But in my view, whether it's around roof insulation, preventing air leakage, work that you can do around insulation, walls, ceilings, better quality windows and the like, all that is going to be absolutely critical to how we think about energy efficiency for both the commercial and the residential building sector. So, Anna, there's a lot of things that are happening in this space. There are a lot of reviews that are underway. These are significant changes. We've always got to balance with regulation the cost with the benefits, but certainly from the federal government's perspective, the concept of driving changes on the demand side in order to get energy efficiency, which lowers power bills, creates a more reliable system, and obviously deals with our carbon footprint, is going to be a real focus for us going forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Josh. Before we open up discussion around demand side, we're going to hear from the Victorian Minister for Environment and Energy and Climate Change, the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio. Welcome, Lily.
Thank you very much, Anna. And can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today. And I pay my respects to elders past and present, and any who may be here amongst us today. And of course, certainly I acknowledge, of course, Josh Frydenberg, my federal counterpart, and other speakers here today. And I'd like to also, of course, acknowledge our host, the Green Building Council of Australia and the Property Council of Australia, for organising this very auspicious event. Certainly we have entered a time of significant change for our energy system, not only, of course, in Victoria or the country, but globally. And we know that a lot of that has been spurred by the 2015 Paris Agreement to keep the global temperature rise well under 2 degrees. That's helping to catalyse our society, our economy, our cities towards a clean energy future. And it is a future that the Victorian Government is embracing, because within that challenge that all of us are facing are terrific opportunities. And it is therefore advantageous for any government, let alone the moral obligation, I think, of governments, is to lead, but also see opportunities where challenges present themselves, to actually assist with the development of the technologies that come with us as we move concertedly to a net zero emissions target. And certainly our state has set its own target of net zero emissions by 2050, and this was enshrined in legislation last year. And why do we do that? Well, we do that importantly to send a very, very clear signal to the whole of the economy that our jurisdiction is very deadly serious about reducing our energy, our emissions. As well as moving towards a system powered by renewable sources, our energy future involves greater participation by communities, by households and by businesses. Demand response, improved energy efficiency and a decentralised clean power system will provide opportunities. It will mean that groups not traditionally associated with the energy sector can be involved in energy generation and improve reliability. Now, there will be degrees of interest in terms of how much people want to participate in this transformation. But the reality is there will always be a base of engagement that communities have otherwise in the past not needed to worry about or consider. And we as governments need to make it easier for people to have that engagement so that it becomes a part of the norm, a part of the mainstream, to rely more on renewable energy, to reduce our energy consumption, and ultimately, as a collective, as a society, move towards net zero emissions by 2050. Our government is working across these areas to deliver a more secure, affordable and clean energy system for all Victorians. Here and globally, the energy system is rapidly modernising, and that is a word, that is a term, a set of opportunities that we absolutely have to embrace. It doesn't look like any one particular thing, it looks like a whole range of different things out there today, and in a year's time, in 5 years' time, it will continue to evolve and be a dynamic, innovative space. So we need to have the policy settings there to allow that innovation to not only be developed but be deployed to the advantage of all of us. And that is what our government's commitment is. Ultimately, we want Victoria to be the new energy technologies hub for the country. And we believe that we've got the right policy settings to be able to achieve that outcome. It's our responsibility to lay a solid foundation using sound and effective policy so that households, communities and businesses, new entrants and older players participating in our changing system can build a clean energy future. So, Victoria, we're doing that through our Renewable Energy Action Plan, our New Energy Technologies Sector Strategy, and our Energy Efficiency and Productivity Strategy. There is not just a role for government to play here, there is an absolute imperative. And there is nothing out of the ordinary on that front. And that they may be privately owned now, of course, a lot of the assets that we have, but every one of the coal-fired plants in the Latrobe Valley, which provide much of our city's energy supply, was originally planned and built by taxpayers, wearing the cost and the risk. So governments have always played a role in our energy system. Around Australia, it is a very similar story. Governments must do the right thing by the societies they serve and plan for the future. And a future that is in energy that is affordable, reliable and increasingly renewable. And communities want all of those things, and they are all possible together. So here in Victoria, we've got ambitious but achievable legislated renewable energy targets, 25% by 2020, 40% by 2025. And this is another way that we are delivering certainty and support for investors and for all Victorians. So what does this mean in real terms? Thousands of megawatts of energy, billions of dollars in investment, and thousands of new jobs from what is the cheapest and the quickest to build form of energy. So we know that there is rapid change happening. The way that we've responded in the past just doesn't cut it anymore. We need quick response mechanisms, and we need a system that facilitates the adoption of those quick, easy to adopt technologies. Our initial VRET auction, which we opened up to the market late last year, will bring forward about 650 megawatts of clean power, offering further certainty through its 15-year support agreements for renewable energy projects. So that's out there. We've got a fantastic response so far, and we're working through, of course, the assessment of those projects. Our renewable certificate purchasing initiative, which was the forerunner to our first VRET auction, buys renewable energy certificates from new Victorian projects like the Kayada Wind Farm, which opened in January. It's one of 4 large-scale renewable generators set to begin operations in Victoria this year, thanks to this initiative. So through state government effort, we will have just over 1,000 megawatts of new build energy, renewable energy generation built in this state by 2020. Whilst not yet widespread in Victoria, using waste as an energy source is another interesting area with a lot of potential. Along with emissions reductions, waste to energy also puts waste to good use and keeps it out of landfill. While renewable energy is increasingly becoming a significant part of Victoria's energy supply, we cannot ignore the critically important role of energy efficiency in delivering a low-cost, high-impact outcome. Energy use in buildings account for approximately a third of Victoria's greenhouse gas emissions, and it is critical that we continue to improve energy efficiency in our built environment. We've put $55 million into energy efficiency in the productivity strategy, which I launched in November last year. It's doing so through programs like the Victorian Energy Upgrades, the Victorian Residential Efficiency Scorecard, the Better Commercial Buildings programs, and other actions to lift the energy efficiency of our buildings. One of our big success stories, of course, has been the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. Existing since 2009, it's been driving Victoria's transition towards a zero emissions economy. In 2018 alone, Victorian Energy Upgrades has cut emissions, or will have cut emissions, by 6.1 million tonnes, the equivalent of taking 1.3 million cars off the road. And it's helped more than 70,000 businesses and 1.7 million households invest in building energy upgrades and installation of low emissions technologies. Participants from last year alone, that is in the upgrades program, will save over $90 million on their energy bills in 2017-18. Over the 3 years to 2020, the Energy Upgrades program will drive investment in energy efficiency that is worth more than $250 million. So there are many other things that I've got on my list, but I know the clock is ticking. So what this tells us all is that there is a full wraparound suite of policies that our government is promoting. But we also, of course, have a clear role to play at a national level. And that's why all of the things that we're doing, including looking at construction code issues, will help inform discussions on the National Construction Code that will be scheduled over the course of this year, and through the COAG Energy Council and the Building Ministers Forum. Equally important, of course, is a need for the Energy Council to accelerate action on appliance energy performance standards so we can lock in those savings and catch up with the rest of the world. Demand response is another critical element of all of this, equipping consumers with the tools to be able to become not just generators but become fuller participants in the way that our energy is delivered through the transmission network, through our poles and wires, using less energy at the right time, shifting the use of energy to lower demand periods will mean that we'll be able to save significant amounts of money off very costly upgrades to our network system, our transmission network, but of course building those new generators also. I'll stop there, but there is much more that hopefully we can explore in the Q&A session. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Lily's absolutely right. There is a lot to explore, even just on the topic of energy efficiency within our Energising Communities theme. We're going to hear from our other two panellists who can bring their industry perspectives to this conversation. And so firstly, I'd like to ask Mark, with your perspective from Stockland, what technologies do you expect to have the greatest uptake in the property industry over the next, say, 3 years, and why?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Well, I think for us, solar is absolutely out in front. We're currently installing 39,000 panels across 10 shopping centres for about 24 million, which will be a 12.5 megawatt installation. That will replace about a quarter of the total energy use across those shopping centres. And given the yield on that is above 10%, it makes obviously good sense for the environment, but it makes great business sense as well. So I think once we get that installed, we'll probably go again because I think there's no reason why we can't get to half or even 75%. And I would say as a sidebar that one thing, I guess to Josh in particular, I think there's a tremendous amount of research and knowledge out there, but we're all collecting it independently. It'd be fantastic if the CSIRO or someone like that could compile a more central data set so that we could actually make sure we're buying the right systems and that we're getting the best bang for buck for Australia, because I think we have the potential to be a world leader. And I think beyond that, of course, is batteries, working out how to store it, and also increasingly electric car utilisation picking up. At the moment we've got 31 Tesla charging stations across the nation. You can drive from Melbourne to Cairns, fueling up in Stockland shopping centres without having to pay a cent. Actually, it's free, so how's that? So anyway, I'll say they're the two key ones. Thanks.
That's terrific. Thanks very much. And now hearing from John with the Macquarie perspective, tell us what's going well in your market and what would you think would help accelerate progress?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And I think our market, I guess, just to be clear, is probably the provision of private investment and private capital into the green energy space, and that's been a pretty well-trodden path on the demand side in terms of the large-scale wind farms and solar generation assets. Private capital and investing in that market is now a pretty well-trodden path. And as we move down onto the demand side in terms of the technology and the capital appetite to invest in that space, the trends I guess we're seeing in the market is the emerging lessening of cost in terms of technology, making the investment proposition in the demand side of energy efficiency more and more accessible. And on the other side, the capital that's looking to invest in that market having a greater and greater appetite to invest in those sorts of technologies and those sorts of initiatives. And I guess if you take those two things in turn, from a capital point of view, we are still in a world where in the infrastructure and energy efficiency space, where there is more private capital available than there is projects to invest in. So we're continuing, from our investors' point of view, getting asked the question, find us things to invest in. Now, that needs to be sort of technologically robust. There needs to be an investment case around that. And as people are finding it difficult to deploy that capital, the remit into which they can invest that capital moves from sort of the regulated utilities to generation to merchant to some of the more emerging technologies, in particular in the demand side and the energy efficiency space. So that's a trend I think that all of us need to take advantage of. And then on the asset side, as we move into that capital being deployed, again, it moves from the large-scale generation side down into the demand management side, and some examples of that, that we're seeing, particularly in our portfolio in the UK and around the world, that innovation in terms of the financing to support the demand side. We're seeing things like green loans emerging. Our Green Investment Group in the UK has put £40 million into green loans to councils in the UK to support them replacing streetlights with new energy efficient streetlights, and the sculpted repayments for those loans match the savings in the energy bill that those councils are achieving through the replacement of those lights. So the loan product matches the energy saving in that circumstance. So that's an initiative we think will roll out as we see across this space. And then on the equity side, we're even seeing projects where, again, our Green Investment Group, some of the energy solutions they're providing is saying to shopping centre owners, hospitals, schools, universities, we'll do a project where we'll look at your whole energy solution, heating, lighting, and help you do a project where we would build, own, operate, maintain, finance a whole revamp of your energy system, and the repayment of that is completely performance-based. So if you make an energy saving against a target, then effectively the equity investors in that project will then get a return, but it only comes to them if those energy efficiency targets are met. So probably some examples there of where we're seeing that combination of the capital that's looking to get deployed into the space, combined with the emerging technology and the investability of the sector really being of benefit at this time to continue to drive increased investment in green initiatives on the energy efficiency side.
Thanks, that's some great insights from what you're hearing. I'm going to have a response from Josh on the data question, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then open it up to the audience.
I think the data bank idea has merit, but not just from the consumer side, also from the regulator side. Because, for example, and this is something that that Lily and I will be following up through COAG Energy Council, is AEMO doesn't know how many storage batteries that households have put in to go with their solar panels, although the information is quite limited. Now, that becomes a challenge for them as they're dealing with the so-called duck curve, where people are absorbing solar power during the day, coming home, cloud cover or the sun goes down, and then suddenly they're coming onto the grid, and they have to manage that. And they're going to have to do that effectively as well with the commercial sector as more of the shopping centres and shopping strips go on onto solar panels. So there is something to be said about data management, and it's important not just from the consumer side but also from the regulator side, because in this fast changing environment it's creating challenges for them. And it's my role, it's Lily's role, it's not to stop this transition but to manage the transition in the most effective way.
Thanks. And Lily, do you want to also add?
Yes, if I can add to that, the mining of data that's out there is absolutely important, I think, to equip industry players to actually engage better and provide better products for consumers, whether they're households or businesses. And our government is actually funding an energy data hub. So we're actually exploring how we can actually collect to have a central point of all of the smart meter data that is de-identified, so that it can be potentially used in a way that can really see the demand response, the demand management side of the equation really take off.
That's right, that's the Centre for New Energy Technologies, C4NET, if you want to follow that development. We heard earlier from Mark Butler and have heard from others in this space about the need for a heart starter for energy efficiency. I wonder if there are any suggestions from the panellists, particularly from what you see in industry, what could make this go faster? What would make it easier for you to deploy your capital or roll out the technologies?
Yeah, maybe a comment from the investment side. I think the policy direction is helpful. So as people are looking at their facilities and making investment decisions, I think people are obviously operating within the policy framework that's emerging, and that facilitates that investment. So I think, continuing on the path there, that's not a heart starter, that's a continuation of the journey, and I think we support and encourage that. I think the thing that we're seeing in and around that's facilitating investment that's really important is that cost of the technology, the software development, the systems, and everything that's now starting to link up these disparate and remote sources of energy efficiency. That cost coming down is making the investment in these technologies and systems and projects commercially viable in and of itself. So the policy support's important, but that technology and the reducing cost of that technology, we're seeing, irrespective of the policy debate, people making those investment decisions from a commercial point of view because they're saving money or because it's an investable proposition. So those two things working together would be our view over the next little while.
Mark.
From our point of view, I mentioned the rooftop solar installation. So bizarrely, $24 million is the largest rooftop solar installation in the Southern Hemisphere. And the amount of effort we've had to go through to procure is ridiculous. And we won't actually get it fully installed for the better part of 18 months. And there's very few providers who can do that kind of scale, and yet that's a drop in the bucket. So I think some of the state and federal government small business initiatives probably need to orientate around this. It's clearly a policy agenda to try to create a more sustainable future and to deal with the growing cost of that. And so if you're thinking about how you prioritise small business funding, I think that's probably an area, because then you can actually accelerate the delivery. And of course, a bit like the flammable panel issue, we hear stories in Europe where they've rolled out panels that are now catching fire and things like that. So we really do need to know what we're bringing into the country, and we're going to bring in hundreds of thousands of panels. Why don't we make sure that the best ones, and why not sort of bulk up some of the ordering and think about how that affects trade relations as well, because ultimately we've got a pretty good sense how much we need in aggregate. We've got all the building blocks, we're just not quite connecting them yet. And so I think connecting them creates a tremendous opportunity. And the last thing I'll say is just the planning and approval process, at a local government level. Not so much for solar, because a lot of that's pretty much encapsulated, but lots of the other initiatives around how you can build to solar orientation, how you seal, how you design. And just remember, as we know, ASBEC is estimating that 23 to 25% of our entire emissions is from the built environment. So with that kind of quantum of impact, and then you think if you simply orientate correctly for solar, you seal properly, and you think about how you landscape, which is not adding any really incremental costs, you can get to an 8-star home, which saves the thousands of dollars that Josh described. So there's a very real example where actually there is no connected thinking whatsoever right now. You've got state government trying to set one agenda, local government sort of off on a tangent, and yet all you'd have to do is align some of that thinking, create a little bit of policy flexibility, and suddenly you're saving, you know, millions or billions of dollars, and you're well on your way to a carbon neutral future.
It's a great vision, suggested right next to policymakers themselves. While we're on the topic of heart starters and accelerating initiatives, there's a question on our screen from the audience on this topic, which asks, we need much greater buy-in from utilities around Australia to drive a real rethink in energy. How are you working with utilities to ensure that these policies and goals to reduce emissions are viable and possible on the ground? Would any of our panellists like to pick this up?
I mean, we're obviously working closely with all the key stakeholders, and we do that through forums like the COAG Energy Council, but also through the regulatory bodies, including the AEMC, AEMO, and to a lesser extent the AER. So we are working closely with the utilities about this massive period of transformation. The other thing that we're seized of at the moment is about affordability, because we've seen a jump in power prices consistently over the last decade, and the people who get hurt the most are the lower income earners, because they spend about 5 times as much of their disposable income on power than the higher incomes. So the bottom 20% of income earners spend 5 times as much of their disposable income as a proportion as those in the top 20% of income earners. And so we really, and this is where energy efficiency is important, and this is where some of the work that's being done by state governments and the federal government, trying to give a leg up to some of the some people on lower incomes, whether it's in community housing arrangements and the like, through the Sustainable Cities program. We need to think about how do we drive these energy efficiency, these capital investments for people on lower incomes who don't necessarily have that disposable income to put solar panels on their roofs.
And we know that through design, many Green Building Council members are trying to look at this through the issues that Mark just suggested, and the Mirvac initiative looking at designing a house with no bills, for example. So there's a lot that we can look at to try and accelerate. Lily, did you have something to add on that?
Yes, absolutely. We're working very, very closely with the utilities in Victoria. For example, there are a number of programs that are out there with some of the distribution businesses that are running some demand management, demand response trials in particular local areas. And that's something that is really important for us, because they've got a lot of learnings to do, because for them business as usual is not an option. They've got to change the way that they're operating, the way that they engage with communities, and the way that they deliver the energy that will help put downward pressure on energy bills. So that's something that we're very committed to. We're also working with the market operator, who is now doing an important study into potential needs for upgrading transmission networks across the national energy market, and in particular in Victoria, so that again there's planning that's happening to help facilitate energy. The more new energy we can get into the system, the more pressure there will be on, downward pressure there will be on wholesale prices. We're also really keen to explore energy efficiency through some programs that we're running for healthy homes, where we're targeting about 1,000 households, vulnerable consumers, vulnerable households, where we'll be rolling out a combination of you're looking at the next question, John. A range of technologies, energy efficiency plus generation on rooftops, that will actually help to deliver cheap, more affordable energy bills, but also really looking after that issue of the impacts of extreme heat and the impacts of extreme cold that actually occur with a lot of vulnerable members of our community when their houses are actually not fit for being able to survive through those extreme weather events.
I could just have another plug for planning. I can tell you in Western Sydney, the temperature is about 5 to 7 degrees warmer than by the coast. We've created a heat sink because we haven't actually defined appropriate landscaping. Most councils have decided they want to plant gum trees everywhere, which actually is rocket fuel for fires. And so, we really need to think about the water content of the plants that we're actually putting down, and obviously their applicability for where we plant them, because that affects how fast they grow. And in fact, you can create, and there's many examples of this around the world, where you can actually create outdoor air conditioning effectively in terms of how you lay out your street grids and how you plant trees and how you solar orientate built form to create a natural flow of air. And that natural flow of air can actually totally change the temperatures by up to 5 degrees. And when you think about what Lily just said, there's a direct translation to a far more enjoyable environment. If you're also at 8 star, you don't need air conditioning on a 40-degree day. So there's totally redefines the comfort for those people and totally changes their energy bill as well, and has many other benefits. And yet it's just about planning. It's so simple, it doesn't actually cost any more. But we just don't take the time to think about these things and then plan in a more holistic fashion. When we get arguments about whether we're going to use Hebel or red brick or brown brick on the facade, when in fact there's far more important things that should be focused on as it relates to design principles and how that translates into energy and also future wearability and sustainability of the structures, because once they're up for 50 to 100 years.
Well, this is actually what the Smart Cities agenda is trying to drive, because no government has total control in this domain. It involves local government, have enormous roles here, state governments, and then federal government. So the whole Smart Cities agenda, which we've done a deal now for Western Sydney, we've done a deal for Townsville, done a deal in Tasmania. The whole purpose is to get 3 levels of government, think about the long-term infrastructure needs, not just the built environment, but also transport infrastructure as population grows, and then and think about that for the future.
There's another question on the screen, and then I can see one in the audience as well. Picking up on the topic of heart starters, we've seen a huge uptake of solar panels in households over the last 5 to 10 years, fed initially by feed-in tariffs and certificates. How do we encourage a similar uptake in electric vehicles so they drop in price too? Do any of the panellists want to respond on EVs?
Well, obviously I've had a bit to say about EVs, and I'm a big supporter of them, and I think they're coming in a big way into the future. We already at the federal level provide some support, and we do that through a lower threshold for the luxury car tax. The CFC's made some significant investments in the electric vehicle space. We need to coordinate more, I think, again at federal, state and local level around the charging infrastructure. When people go to buy an electric vehicle or think about buying one, 3 things are on their mind: cost, and right now 13 out of the 16 electric vehicles on sale are above $60,000. So until that price comes down, you won't see that major uptake. The second is about the length of your travel time without needing to recharge, and currently it's about 350 kilometres. But again, the Chief Scientist's advice is that's going to change dramatically with the improvements in battery, so it won't be long before you're going 1,000 kilometres on one charge. And then third is the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. We only have about 470 charging stations in Australia, whereas across Europe there are 60,000. And I think we can do a lot more with the recharging infrastructure, harmonising that across the country. And that's where I think state and local governments can work. And obviously state governments have the registration and those sort of stamp duty and a few other things that are relevant to the costs.
And if I can add to that, the planning side is really important. So with new houses that are being built, at any types of commercial buildings, there needs to be some serious consideration of ensuring that it's actually built for the advent of electric vehicles. So combined with storage that in itself is a storage technology. Having a car sitting in your garage overnight can, being recharged from wind energy that possibly might be the strongest at night time, and then having it available to go the next day is really critical. So the planning around new communities, having that EV capability built into your new buildings is really important. The other thing that's important here, of course, is away from passenger vehicles. There are a number of really good businesses out there that are now working very hard to look at commercial size vehicles to have them run on electricity. And there's some certainly in Victoria where there's a lot of scope for that happening, and some local councils and state governments that are looking at their own procurement power to be able to help to facilitate the development of those technologies on the road.
Thank you. Let's go to the question in the audience. I see the microphone there.
Jeff Robinson from Oricon.
He always asks the first question.
One of the biggest challenges we face in energy efficiency for householders is the actual enforcement of the existing building standards that we have. Do the members of the panel support bringing in mandatory pressure testing of residential buildings as a very cheap way of providing tangible assurance to householders that they're actually getting what they paid for, and also to providing support through the government, providing training through organisations like the HIA and Master Builders to increase the level of training around building standards for airtightness and insulation?
Lily.
Look, the question of compliance has been one that's been around now for a while. From last year's state budget, our government's put aside some funds to actually do some inspections, so that way we actually start to put a bit more rigour potentially, and also hopefully we can prove that the compliance regime, the actual efficiency ratings that are advertised are actually real. We would hope that would give confidence certainly to the sector that the outcomes are actually being achieved. If it demonstrates that there are some areas that are lacking, certainly that means that there may be other responses that are required by government. In Victoria, we've also got the energy scorecard that we're rolling out, which is a really good technology that people can actually test their own homes for the energy efficiency rating of homes, and that's something that we're now developing up in terms of a commercial application that will be really important for a lot of energy businesses out there to go off and test the actual energy efficiency of homes, and then be able to have an informed household that can then make decisions and choices about what they need to do to improve the energy efficiency and save on their energy bills.
Thank you. We are almost at time. I don't see it. Oh, there is one more question at the audience, I think, right at the back.
Thank you panel. Jay from South Pole, carbon neutral event sponsor. Just wanted to ask about embedded carbon and a working price on carbon and how that's being considered with the ECO. Embedded carbon in the building sector. What's the conversation there?
Well, I mean, obviously the price on carbon's been a vexed debate at the political level, so I'll just deal with it at a high level. We, as a government, have taken a position that we're not putting an explicit price on carbon. We've funded, obviously, a number of measures that are designed to reduce emissions, whether that's in the land sector with the Emissions Reduction Fund, whether that's through the Renewable Energy Target, which is really a form of industry policy in a way, and putting in place new standards around the built environment and appliances to reduce emissions, but also to reduce people's power bills. So our approach is through a regulatory approach, through a funding approach where it's needed, as opposed to putting an explicit price on carbon.
And from industry, Mark.
I'd just say from us, I mean, at the moment we're probably most focused on timber. You know, we like the idea of cross-laminated timber and multiple different types of integrated construction. I think, you know, we also need to focus a lot more in this country around the innovation in construction techniques, because back to the question about pressure testing homes, unfortunately the Australian homes leak like sieves, which is why they have such low ratings. So, you know, where you can have you know, modular or prefab and incorporate cross-laminated timber and other timber elements and other natural elements, that to us seems like the, you know, the most, I guess, constructive way forward.
Thank you. To close, I'm going to pose a question to the room, to the industry that we're in. We've been discussing trends and developments in the sort of 3-year outlook, because 3 years is an easy thing to imagine, and certainly a very relevant frame for federal politicians. I'm going to invite us all to think 12 years ahead, as we were invited to do so this morning at breakfast, to 2030. 2030 is certainly a year we talk about a lot in climate change. It's the year of Australia's Paris Climate Agreement pledge commitment. It's also the year the Sustainable Development Goals are required to be met, and the Australian government has signed up to these, as have many corporates. And so when we think about 12 years, and we've been discussing 3-year business cycles, 12 years is really 4 federal election terms, or 3 if you're in Victoria, where we are here and we have fixed 4-year terms. Or it's 2 investment cycles if you think about corporate loans being an average of 5 to 7 years. And it's 1 school cycle if we think about all the prep kids who started school this term. They will be finishing high school in 2030. And so my question to us is, what world do they graduate into? Is it a world where we've achieved those targets? Because those targets are the step towards the safe climate future and smart cities that we know we need. But to even reach that step, we have to double the pace of energy efficiency demand-side response and double the pace of the renewables supply-side response. Even noting the positive trends we've seen today, reaching that step is doubling. So when we think about the prep kids today stepping out of their final year of high school, who will have done that while they've been studying? It's the industry. It's us. Can we do it? Is my question to you. Is that a yes? One person thinks yes. What do other people think?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that sort of time frame, technology is going to play a key role. So it's going to be artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, and Moore's law will ensure that the rate of change is going to escalate. And so you think from here, it's not too much that Alexia will be telling you, you know, look, you're burning at whatever it is, $300 an hour at the moment. Do you want to turn off the air conditioning? You know, mobile batteries will be the cars, and you know, the Internet of Things will ensure that you have the knowledge to be able to do the things we've been talking about. So we're highly confident, and I think our goal should be, you know, with Josh's leadership, that we should aim to be a world leader, because we absolutely have that. Most of the real estate companies are global leaders in terms of being the most sustainable real estate companies in the world. We've got a pretty connected environment, and we've got a very strong will, and we just need to get on with it.
That's a great note to end on, as our screen tells us time is up. We want to back ourselves and do it for our kids, and do it before they graduate, I hope. Thank you very much for your input, and thank you very much to the absolutely fabulous and very esteemed panel. What a privilege it has been for us to share this discussion.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again to our stellar associate sponsor, BlueScope Steel. And please join with me in thanking Ministers Frydenberg, D'Ambrosio, Titans of Industry, Mark and John, and of course Anna, for a characteristically thoughtful discussion with our key leaders across all the topical energy matters of our age. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And parenthetically, very good to see our conference favourite from Oricon warming up so early in the conference. Before morning tea, I am excited to introduce the wonderful Merrick Spain. What a great name that is. I mean, really, I'm hoping that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has Merrick in it. He's the Smart Cities lead from Telstra Enterprise. He'll be launching an important new report regarding our low-carbon future. Please make him welcome as we commence with a video.
This is a story about a park and technology. But parks and tech don't go together, do they? Well, what if I told you Telstra helped create a park where the bins talk and you can see the air? Our story begins with the city of Joondalup, aiming to be one of Australia's most innovative and livable cities. Telstra is helping them use the Internet of Things to do things better for their community.
The city has a strong focus on innovation within the workplace. Telstra has helped us install sensors within the bins that helps us understand when those bins are reaching capacity. By having that real-time data displayed on a dashboard, we can empty those bins that actually need emptying.
Other sensors let the city view environmental conditions, like weather and noise levels. And car park cameras and digital displays make it easier to find free parking bays.
That allows us to be able to view in near real-time data what is happening within the park, and it helps us keep on top of things.
Data is transmitted over the Telstra network and collated on a Telstra-made, user-friendly display.
Telstra has really assisted us to enhance our understanding of what digital technologies can do for our organisation and for the benefit of our community.
So if the parks are better in your location, it may well be the product of a Telstra collaboration. Find out how we can help your organisation innovate at telstra.com/innovation.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. Can't say I've ever had that said about me. But I think together with all of you, I'd settle for being known as somebody who is a guardian of the planet that we live on. Let's start there and work our way outwards. So I'm very pleased to be here today to launch our latest report, but I did want to steal 1 minute before I do that. I believe that this is the 12th or 13th year. Somebody's probably going to correct me. 12th, thank you. Somebody did say 13th to me this morning, of this event. And it's really exciting for Telstra to be involved in this conversation. From our perspective, in a technology-saturated future, us having the opportunity to attend and take part in the conversation that's happening today with the built form environment is going to be critical. And it's only through the conversations that we can have at events like this, by crossing over the sectors that we feel comfortable with, that we'll be able to do the amazing things that we can do together in future. So as I said, I'm delighted to announce the launch of a new report that we've developed on the role that technology, or at least one of the roles technology plays in enabling low-carbon economic growth. You've just seen a video which is one of many case studies that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years across the country, helping cities and communities, from the big ones to the small ones, to really take baby steps and put a toe in the water and understand the implications of a connected world. And really one of the key facets of that is the data from all of those connected things. So as per Joondalup, all of those devices are sending back information, real-time information, that helps to assess and analyse and understand the performance of that specific asset. But obviously one of the key things here is that that data has a significant role to play in helping us solve the wicked problems of the future. That is the way that we're going to overcome some of society's big challenges, not only specifically in terms of environment, but also in terms of other really important areas like transport and mobility, traffic congestion, etc., etc. But if you think about it, one of the key issues there is all of that data from an increasingly connected world has to go somewhere. Now, historically, the way that organisations have dealt with that is to do that in-house. But what this new report shows, in fact, is that leveraging cloud technology is a far smarter way to manage that data. And so we're convinced that cloud computing is a foundational part of the consideration of creating greener and happier cities and communities of the future. So today we're launching our report. It's called Connecting with Cloud, a Low Carbon Future is Ahead. And as part of that report, we've crunched the numbers and come up with what we believe is a compelling case for organisations to consider that approach. As an example, the estimates that we've built on small to medium enterprises in terms of energy savings could be between $4,000 and $10,000 per annum, which for small organisations is a significant amount of money. And in addition to that, could potentially reduce their carbon footprint related specifically to the ICT hardware and systems that would be required to cater for all of that data by up to 84%. So if you'd like to find out more, please do jump online. We have an online calculator that I'm sure you'll all have fun playing with and seeing what kind of benefits there might be to be derived for organisations like yourselves and others out there. And jump online at telstra.com/cloud footprint. And please do take the time, if you have a moment, to visit our stand at the back where we have our sustainability and technology experts. I'm more than happy to talk you through that and speak to you about some of the other technologies that we're bringing to market specifically for the built form environment and smart buildings, etc. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Well done. Thank you, Merrick. Morning Tea is also proudly sponsored by our supporting sponsor, Telstra, and during Morning Tea, obviously we'd like you to take the opportunity to visit our exhibitors in the foyer, including the Lend-Lease Coffee Cart, the CRC for Low Carbon Livings display, Liberty One Steel's Bike and Blend, Wood Solutions display, the Gelato stand by BlueScope Steel, and the Geo Air display, as well as the Telstra exhibit. We're currently trending at #1 in Melbourne on Twitter, #2 Australia-wide, so tweet your brains out over Morning Tea, and I'll see you back here at 11:20 sharp. Thank you.